All right, let's jump right in. We're going to break down a war that, on the surface, looks like an absolute slam dunk, a huge victory. But when you peel back the layers, yeah, you start to see it's actually a trap with no obvious way out.
Okay, but first, a quick heads up. Everything we're about to walk through is based on a really detailed but, and this is important, completely hypothetical war scenario from our source material. So think of this less like a news broadcast and more like a deep dive into military strategy. So let's kick things off with the numbers, because they create this central puzzle. On one side, you've got a number that just screams total victory, right? 9,000 US and allied strikes. I mean, that's an absolutely massive air campaign. But on the other side, a totally defiant response. Seven separate waves of Iranian missiles launched in just one night. And that just begs the question, right? How is that even possible? Why isn't all that overwhelming force leading to a nice, clean win? Well, that is the mystery we're going to solve together. All right, first up, we've got to get into the nitty-gritty, the math of it all. We're talking about attrition, the whole process of just wearing down your enemy. Because that gap, that disconnect between what looks like a victory and what's actually happening on the ground, it's all buried in the numbers. The headlines from this kind of campaign would look incredible. U.S. forces achieve a 90% reduction in Iran's missile launch capability. Wow. I mean, a number like 90%? That sounds totally decisive. Like, game over, war's ending. But, and this is a huge but, it's hiding something really important. Okay, so this is where it gets super interesting. Let's actually unpack that 90% number. So intelligence estimates suggest Iran started with about 2,500 ballistic missiles. The air campaign, it wipes out 700 of them in storage. Then Iran fires off another 500 in the fighting. You do the quick math, and what are you left with? 1,300 missiles, still ready to go. And that right there is the key takeaway. Iran's ability to launch missiles has been seriously degraded, for sure. But here's the thing, they are nowhere close to being disarmed. And in a war like this, that distinction, well, it's everything. It's literally the difference between seeing 7 missile waves light up the sky and seeing none at all. So this brings us to a huge shift in how we have to think about this conflict. The air war, that whole battle of numbers we just talked about, it's a big deal, but it's not the main event. What if I told you the most powerful weapon in this whole war isn't a missile, but a currency? Right, because the real battlefield in this whole scenario, it isn't in the skies over the Middle East. It's actually hidden in the foundations of the entire global financial system. Yup, it's all about the money. And to get what's happening, we absolutely have to talk about something called the petrodollar system. For the last 50 years, this has been the bedrock of American power. The idea is actually pretty simple. The world's most important commodity, oil, is priced and sold only in US dollars. That means every single country out there needs a stash of dollars just to buy energy. And that gives the US an incredible amount of economic leverage. This is a great way to see how it works. It's basically a giant recycling system. So, step 1, countries need US dollars to buy oil. Step 2, the big oil exporting nations end up with massive piles of these dollars. And step 3, they recycle those dollars right back into the US economy by buying things like US government bonds and stocks. It's this beautiful, self-sustaining loop that's allowed the US to fund, well, pretty much everything. And this is Iran's big counter move. It's not another missile launch, it's a simple, devastating policy change. A senior official basically says, hey, all you oil tankers, you can pass through the Strait of Hormuz, the world's busiest oil highway, totally safe. But there's just one catch. You have to pay us in Chinese yuan. Yuan. Only. That is a direct shot, a torpedo, aimed right at the heart of that 50-year-old system we were just talking about. Now, this kind of economic warfare, it doesn't just put the US and Iran in a tough spot. It creates these just impossible choices for America's closest allies. And there is no better case study for this than Japan. I mean, just look at this. Japan's situation is, well, it's incredibly vulnerable. A massive 93% of all the oil it imports has to pass through that exact same choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. So when things get messy there, Japan's entire economy, we're talking everything, is suddenly on the line. So suddenly, Japan is stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's a brutal choice. On one hand, Iran quietly comes to them and says, look, we'll let your ships through, no sweat. But on the other hand, their number one ally, the United States, is demanding they show public solidarity. And that means turning down Iran's offer and staring down the barrel of a full-blown energy crisis.
In the end, Japan chooses the alliance. And, as you can see here, the price tag is staggering. To keep the relationship strong, they pledge a one-time $40 billion investment in U.S. infrastructure. But the real kicker, the ongoing cost, it's an extra $46 billion they have to shell out every single year for energy, all because they can't take Iran's deal. Talk about the price of loyalty.
Okay, so when you start putting all these different pieces together, you've got the air war that isn't really winning, you've got this huge economic battle, and you've got all the diplomatic fallout, you finally arrive at the core of the problem. America has walked straight into a strategic trap. Let's talk about the first part of this trap. We'll call it the ceasefire trap. Now, you'd think the obvious goal is to just negotiate a way out of the war, right? But in this scenario, a ceasefire, especially one on Iran's terms, could actually be more damaging than just keeping the fight going. Why? Because if the U.S. takes a deal that means pulling out of the region, the scenario lays out this absolutely catastrophic domino effect. Think about it. The Gulf states, they need a new protector, so they pivot to Iran. The petrodollar system we talked about, it implodes. Allies like Japan and South Korea, feeling abandoned, start to rearm themselves. It's a total cascade failure that could unravel decades of American foreign policy in the blink of an eye.
So, okay, if pulling out is too costly, what about doubling down? What about escalating? Well, that's the other side of the trap, the escalation trap. The pressure starts to build to put boots on the ground, right? Maybe just a limited operation to secure some key objectives. But here's the problem with limited invasions. They have a really nasty habit of not staying limited. They pull you deeper and deeper into a quagmire with no clear finish line. And all of this leaves us with one last, really tough question. When continuing to fight is totally unsustainable, but ending the war on your enemy's terms is an absolute catastrophe, what does victory even mean anymore? It's just a stark reminder that in the messy world of modern warfare, having overwhelming force doesn't always guarantee you'll have an easy way out.